What was your what the hell just happened moment? Story 1. On a family vacation in Daytona Beach, Florida. We have a beachfront hotel. I'm about 9 years and I'm standing on the balcony. So I'm standing there looking down and I see this lady lying on a towel getting a tan. Very normal. Then I watch in disbelief as car pulls right into her spot and parks right on top of the lady. So I yelled to my mom, "Hey mom, that car just ran over a lady." They didn't believe me till a crowd suddenly formed and something like 4 to 6 guys ran over and lifted the car off this woman. That was 45-ish years ago. To this day, I have no idea how it turned out for her. Story 2. I was about 10 and I was sitting in Spanish class when all of a sudden my hearing went very tinny and muffled. My parents took me to the doctor that night. They were scoping my ear and whispering amongst themselves. After several attempts to remove the blockage, they had to knock me out. The next thing I knew was I was waking up and they told me I'd had a 15 mm nail inside my ear. They showed me it and there it was, a dark, bloody nail. At age 10, I was way past putting things inside orifice that didn't belong there. We still don't know how it got there, where it came from, or why it only bothered me halfway through the day. Story 3. My dad was diabetic and so drank unsweetened tea that he added artificial sweetener to at the table. At a restaurant, a waitress had brought a glass of sweet tea. He couldn't drink it, my mom and I were drinking Pepsi, so it just sat on the end of the table untouched. The glass was scalding hot like it had just been pulled out of the sanitizer. So we're sitting there talking about whatever, and suddenly we hear glass breaking, and the table is now covered in tea and we're all just frozen like WTF for a solid 20 seconds because we knew none of us had knocked the glass over. What was more odd is I found the glass on my side, and Dad found the glass on his side, too. We looked closer, and it had split pretty dang cleanly right down the middle. Our best guess is the iced tea meeting the super hot glass had finally caused it to break. The two sides weren't quite a clean, razor-like cut. They were a little wavy, but it was pretty dang close to being perfectly cleaved in two. Story 4. Mine is a pleasant memory. Over the summer and leading into the first quarter of my senior year of high school, I was in a stormy, on-and-off relationship with a particular girl. One day at lunch, right outside the cafeteria, she dumped me again and stormed off. I walked off in another direction and found a quiet place under a stairwell where I could sit alone for a couple minutes. When I turned around, there was a girl named Stephanie who had followed me with concern on her face. I tried to be polite. I said something like, "Thank you, but I'm not in the mood to talk right now." She broke down crying, grabbed 2 handfuls of my hair, pulled me in, and shoved her tongue down my throat. When she let me back up for air, she said, "You don't have to keep going back to her." The rest of my senior year went much better. Story 5. I booked the music in a small dive club for about a decade. Good times, literally voted best dive bar in the county. I had the great fortune to book a lot of great music, but my WTF just happened. Moment came on a night I had this hot blues horn band. They have 3 horns, a singer, guitar, keys, bass, and drums crammed on a tiny stage. There's a bigger club, legit small nightclub 3 doors down. That night then had the legendary Count Basie Big Band for 2 shows, 7 and 9. Our music starts at 9:30. Well, CBBB finishes the second show around 10. About 10:30, I see these 3 guys come in and order drinks. They're in black dress pants, white shirts, and red vests, and didn't think much of it beyond how cool is that. A few of CBBB guys popped up to our place after their gig. Well, our band gets on stage about then. These guys start bobbing their heads and snapping their fingers and looking like they like it. Cool, but they leave after a drink or 2. Not 15 minutes later, 5 of those guys walk in with horns, and there was an absolute free-for-all. They sat in and we had 8 horns, stuffed into every spare inch of the stage and spilling out on the dance floor. It was pure magic. And when it was all said and done, the place went hog wild, and you could definitely say that the phrase WTF was repeated more than a few times. Story 6. Was on a silversmithing short course all quietly-ish, using the piercing saws to cut silver in groups of 2, 3. Piercing saws have an almost hair fine. Hear a ping, think nothing of it. A minute later, a lady in her 50s wanders over to my group to show us something. She says, "Silly me, look what I've gone and done." Approx 2-inch section of the saw directly through her little finger. There was no blood, and she had pretty much no reaction to it. She spent 11 hours in AE waiting to get it removed, as the teeth are extremely small and it must have been right on the bone. Pulling it the wrong way would have done a lot of damage. She later said if she'd known how long it was going to take, she'd have yanked it out with pliers. Absolutely no idea how she managed to do that, though, and for the whole rest of the course she kept inuring herself in weird ways. Story 7. In 1980, I was living just a couple houses away from the John Deere estate in Moline, Illinois. Pretty wooden Victorian-style mansion with some great garden and grounds, surrounded at the time by a 3-foot-high wrought iron fence. I would often hop this fence and go sit under the flagpole, which had an expansive view of the MS River Valley below. One night I was up there watching a thunderstorm approach from the Iowa side. Noticed the lightning was getting close. Just as I was fixing to get up, the flagpole got struck. Saw white, felt a heat flash, and then felt myself hit the ground. Then I heard thunder. Blind as a bat, I ran down the hill. Came back for my glasses the next morning. Ha ha. Story 8. Lived in SEPTLD as a kid, and one morning left my house one morning, headed for middle school, and had just stepped out into the crosswalk when the loudest sound and what felt like a huge gust of wind hit my back, and then started getting hit by what I discovered later to be pieces of glass. Turns out a guy driving high had flown down the street behind me, and from what he told cops afterwards, he had intended to turn right at the stoplight there, right where I had just stepped out and was already a good couple of feet into the crosswalk. When he said he saw me at the last second as he was going to turn, and said he panicked out of not wanting to hit the kid crossing the road, and instead of just going straight through the light or slamming on the brakes, he made an involuntarily jerk of his steering wheel to the left and wound up hitting 2 vehicles stopped at the light right there as I was crossing. Everyone walked away uninjured. He walked right off to jail, I remember, but to this day I'm just grateful he saw me. Had he not, I very likely could have been terminated. Story 9. Hit an IED in 07. The fun part, it was about 3 seconds after I said, "Oh, this looks familiar." We had been 50 behind a Husky search vehicle that hit another IED 4 days before, 100 yards forward of where we were at that moment. It was like being in a car accident, slowly moving forward at 10 miles an hour, suddenly coming to a complete forward movement stop, dropping 7 feet. Huge cloud of dust that took us from dusk to full black in 0 seconds. Charles, originally from Haiti, and I never once understood a thing he said, I hope he's doing well today, being kind of dropped on my back and being more or less just sort of disoriented. Team leader asking if we were okay. We all said, "I think so," and driving backwards at what would for the next 4 days be our top speed of 3 miles per hour. It was a bizarre week, followed by an even more bizarre 5 days of absolute wackiness, death, and abject despair that I hope to never have visited on anyone ever again. Story 10. I was in Korea in the middle of COVID in a night market in Busan. A Korean man came up to me, surprised to see a white person there, and started talking in Korean. I said, knowing what he was saying, but not how to respond in Korean, "I'm American." The guy grinned, switched to English, put out an enthusiastic thumbs up, and very slowly said, "Trump, out! Good! Goodbye!" and walked away cheerfully without giving me a chance to reply. The horror I felt between each word at where this sentence could possibly be going. I turned to my friend and went, "Did that just happen?" And she shrugged and went, "I have no idea, man." Story 11. Long story short, back in February of the year, I worked for a local lawn spraying company we fertilized, spot treated, done everything to a yard to make it look pretty other than cut the grass. February 2nd on a Friday, me and my buddy, Tyler, who worked with me at the time, was coming down the road where there are 2 bridges probably a 1-4 apart from each other. Keep in mind, my truck at the time had 500 gallons worth of water mixed with chemicals. And a ride-on machine for fertilizing that weighed 250 to 300 pounds. Anyways, a guy came over into our lane, hit us head-on. He caught the edge of the truck bed, and it completely sheared the entire driver's side off of his car. We slid sideways, going directly toward the guardrail of the first bridge, jumped the bridge, nose-dived into a creek from a 30-foot drop, and landed upside down. Adrenaline kicked in and we was out of the truck within 10 seconds of landing. All I could say afterwards was "what the fudge" over and over. We didn't have any broken bones, or any debilitating injuries other than Tyler tearing his shoulder up pretty good. I had a bruise on my leg, not on my head with a cut, and on top of that found out in the ER, due to a CT scan with dye, that I had enlarged lymph nodes, which could have meant lymphoma. But yeah, I'm cleared from that, no cancer. But definitely a what the fudge moment for sure. Story 12. The summer after college, I went home for a last hurrah kind of visit. Met up with my best friend, who had a female friend that was a student at the college in my hometown. They weren't romantic. He had a girlfriend. At one point that summer, she asked me to go to a movie with just her, not my friend and her. First time we would have that dynamic, and I was all for it. Another event came up and I asked for a rain check on the movie. She said sure, I didn't think much of it. Unfortunately, we never got to go out. But on the last night I was home, my friend threw a big going-away party for me. This girl was there, and at the end of the night she said, "Come here, I want to tell you something." I walked over to a corner of the bar with her, and she grabbed me and gave me what can only be described as the most passionate kiss imaginable. I didn't see it coming, but I accepted it willingly. It was amazing. After it was over, she turned around and walked off. Not a word. Not a look back, just kept walking. That was 35 years ago, and I think about it often. Oof. Story 13. September 2020, I, at the time M25, was still in grad school. One night after my class, me and my roommate, at the time M28, took the risk of COVID to have a few drinks at the bar just a walking distance from our place. It is around midnight, said roommate notices this woman, 32, sitting by herself. Out of pity, he invited her to sit with us. Right off the bat, she was flighty, and when I tried to introduce myself, she flats out ignores me. About 30 minutes before last call, I head back to our place because it was humid as fudge and needed a shower. When I got out and dressed, my roommate is back with a mutual friend and the woman, so we all breathed some candy, then they began to set in. Turns out this woman is anti-vaxxer, believes in Reiki, chakras, and transcendental meditation over Western medicine. Then it turns out she's a veteran with PTSD, which she was not taking her meds for. Then something about my roommate's coral tank triggers a PTSD episode at around 3 a.m. Her voice begins to slur and she says, "I'm dissolving into purple glitter," nearly collapsing. Then my roommate and our friend had to stop her from trying to hurl herself into traffic. Since he brought her here, I figured this was issue to solve. When I woke up with a hangover, it's about noon. I had an essay due at 7. I go into the living room. This woman was still here. She somehow wrapped a blanket around her head and vomited in it. Apparently, at some point during the night, she tried to throw herself into the glass coffee table. Turns out my roommate was staving off calling emergency services because he didn't want her to face involuntary commitment. When we thought she was good to walk out, she just stops in her steps and collapses, hitting her head on the banister of the porch. So we have to keep her awake due to risk of concussion. I mean, this woman was straight up catatonic. Then at another point, I had to take all the knives out of the kitchen when she collapsed on the floor, screaming, "They know my name!" I'm in the wrong portal. They know my name. I'm a Virgo Libra cusp. I'm a Virgo Libra cusp. When get one of her friends on the phone to calm her down, she says, "Jane Doe, calm down. Hop back inside the Matrix. I'll make pancakes when I get off my shift." None of her friends could get off work until around 7 p.m. when we reached the point of, "Fudge, let's call an ambulance." Turns out that also exacerbated her PTSD. Turns out her abusive ex was an MP in the military and is now an EMS driver. Then finally, it's 7 p.m. Her friends come to take her out of our hands. From what heard, she flipped out in the car, almost causing them to crash, and she ended up voluntarily committing herself. So after that, I get into contact with a veteran friend of mine to see if he knew anything about her. He sighs and goes, "What did she do this time?" And another acquaintance told me she did the same thing at her place some weeks back. Story 14. A coworker came in a few minutes after I did. Our desks face each other, divided by a wall. I had only been sitting down for a few minutes. She came from around the corner to my desk and started yelling at me about things falling off her desk when I slam boxes down. Before I even had a chance to comprehend what she said, I was called to the manager's office. Luckily, he said to Troublemaker, we have never had a problem with her. She does whatever we ask her to. She has worked exactly the same for all the years she worked for us. She also told him I called her evil. No idea what sparked so much rage so quickly. I never called her any name. It was completely out of the blue. Story 15. This is 100% true. In high school, my sister and I were walking down the street in a not-so-nice neighborhood, and there was a dude in front of us who was ripped, but really, really skinny ripped. He had massive headphones on, and we could hear his music from about 10 feet behind him. My sister commented on how hot he was, and I replied that he was way too skinny for my tastes. We kept chatting, and the guy was in the crosswalk, but we stopped because I'm that moron that won't cross the street without the little walking guy. So my sister and I stopped at the street corner. In the middle of the street, the guy turned around and looked at us, yelled, "I remember everything," did a backflip, and then ran down the street away from us. My sister and I just stared at each other like, WTF? Story 16. Okay, this will sound like it's fake, but I cow you not. In the early 2000s, William Shatner was touring with his one-man show, Shatner's World. We headed to see it at the Pantages Theater in L.A. Great show, funny and serious, and attended by many celebrities. At intermission, I headed to the toilet and took my place at a urinal. A guy takes the one on my left. I glance over to see none other than David freaking Hasselhoff, taking a leak right next to me. I'm too freaked out to say much of anything, so I smile, nod, and say, Hey, enjoying Bill's show, he asks. Absolutely. You? Yes, I am. And then he's gone. Yes, he washed his hands. I related the story to my friends, who were a bit skeptical until the end of the show when he waved to me in the lobby. Story 17. One of my most memorable what the fudge just happened moments occurred when I was on a routine trip to the grocery store. It was an ordinary day, and everything seemed normal until a sequence of bizarre events unfolded within a short span of time. As I was walking down the cereal aisle, I noticed an elderly woman struggling to reach a box on the top shelf. I offered to help her, and she gratefully accepted. Just as I handed her the box, a man nearby who was reaching for something on a higher shelf accidentally knocked over a display of canned goods. The cans tumbled down like a waterfall, causing quite a commotion. While this was happening, another shopper, seemingly startled by the noise, lost control of his shopping cart, which then rolled into a stack of paper towel rolls, causing them to scatter all over the floor. People were rushing to pick up the cans and paper towels, trying to restore order. In the midst of this chaos, a young child, apparently inspired by the unfolding pandemonium, decided it was the perfect time to start an impromptu race down the aisle with his toy car, narrowly missing a few shoppers who were still busy with the cleanup. As I was helping to pick up the cans, I glanced over and saw the store manager rushing towards us, only to slip on a can of soup that had rolled away, causing him to stumble, but luckily catch himself on a shelf before falling. The situation had escalated from a simple act of helping someone reach a box to a full-blown scene of chaos, almost like a comedy sketch. After things finally settled down, I couldn't help but stand there in disbelief, wondering how such a normal day had turned into such a surreal and chaotic experience in a matter of minutes. It was a perfect storm of random events that left everyone involved shaking their heads and eventually laughing at the absurdity of it all. Story 18. Went to a concert in Atlanta, parked in a lot a couple streets over from the venue. Figured it was a decently commercial area, the lot was for several businesses, should be pretty chill. Show ends and I'm walking back to my car when this group of kind of rough-looking dudes appears in front of me, sharing a joint. They greet me, so I return in kind, thinking I'll get to slip off on my way. Wishful thinking. They kind of stall and start chatting. Ask if I want to sell the CDs I bought. Eventually ask to buy the shirt I'm wearing. It'd be kind of awkward to show up at home shirtless. Two of the dudes break off and one keeps walking with me. Now, it's relevant, but the other two dudes, one was black and the other Hispanic. The dude walking with me was white. Eventually, there's a siren in the distance, and he kind of picks up the pace and shows a level of urgency. At this point, I'm pretty well convinced I'm not going home. So awkward as I am, I just say it. Straight up, I just tell him I'm a bit weirded out by the situation. I'll never forget his reply. I just want to get off these windy streets. You're white, I'm white, and you've got a car in this parking lot so it doesn't look as suspicious. Solid logic. I didn't really know what to say to that. Eventually, up the aisle from my car, we part ways. I shook his hand, passing him the rest of the cash from my transaction at the venue, because honestly, I was just glad I wasn't being robbed, plus it was a hell of a story I'd have, and he disappeared into the night. I got in my car, booked at the fudge out of there, and still ask myself, what the fudge? Story 19. So this is not mine, but my husband's. My husband and I had our daughter right after having my son. They are just a year and 2 months apart, so my husband and I were pretty exhausted from just having a newborn and a toddler, LOL. I was also exclusively breastfeeding her, so nighttime felt like a fever dream most of the time. One night I fell asleep when I was nursing her in our bed and relaxed my arms. She was probably just a month old, and the weight of her head made her fall to the edge of the bed. My husband was sleeping, and in his sleep he saw a bright light speak to him. It said, "My husband's name, open your eyes." He tried to ignore it until the light spoke again, but this time it poked his back. He woke up and turned to where he felt the poke, thinking it came from me, but instead saw how our month-old daughter was about to fall off the bed. He jumped up and grabbed her. I woke up so confused to what had happened, but saw my husband's "what the F just happened" face. Looking back at it now, my daughter is about to turn 3. We firmly believe that that was her guardian angel waking him up. That night, my husband was so scared to go back to sleep, though, because of how real the poke felt. Story 20. Was riding a train across the country for fun, and a slightly disheveled but friendly guy walks in looking lost. I offer to explain where the nearest bathroom and snack shop are, assuming he is looking for one of those. He takes that as an invitation to start unloading several ridiculous conspiracy theories on me. Essentially, his thesis was that the liberal government had manufactured the coronavirus and had a 10-year plan to institute a new world order, whatever that means. The vaccine was somehow related to a mind control scheme that was going to be initiated in a few years. He goes on to tell me that he was traveling west to go live off the grid at a commune that he found online. I patiently respond with a few counterpoints, explain that I'm a doctor who works in a hospital, and I've personally had hundreds of patients pass away from the virus, essentially none of whom had been vaccinated. After about 45 minutes of him rambling and not taking any of my points seriously, I make up an excuse to leave the conversation. I had to physically leave my seat and go to the second floor of the train to get away. A few hours later, I overhear him conversationally assaulting a fellow passenger nearby in my new location, including a direct quote of, "Doctors are all just sheeple. They're sheep people." At this point, I had given up on trying to get through to this guy and just kept my headphones on and read my book. Some people aren't worth trying to save, LEL. A few hours later, I go back to my original seat, and a lady I've never spoken to goes out of her way to tell me she was really impressed with how I handled the conversation by staying calm and sensible despite the ridiculous nature of it. We shared a moment of connection over that and then never talked again the rest of the trip. Long train rides are such an interesting way to travel. I'll have to do it again sometime. Story 21. I have a couple. First, I was riding home from work. We were going down a hill near a bunch of frat houses. We were stopped and saw a truck take a turn way too fast in front of us. It overcorrected and ramped up the curb. It went completely vertical and was moving up an electrical pole. It slowed, then started to fall over to the street. All this happened directly in front of us. The passengers crawled out and seemed okay. They were very drunk. Second, my friend and I were at a pizza place downtown. It was cold outside, but the workers in both the front and back doors opened because the oven was getting really smoky. All of a sudden, 2 deer run into the front door, through the restaurant with a good amount of people, then out the back door. Story 22. Went for an off-road trip deep in the forest with a few friends. Finished for the day and got back to a spot to air up our tires on our Jeeps. We were kilometers and then some from civilization. I had an issue with a disconnect for a front sway bar, and it needed to be tightened, otherwise it wouldn't be able to keep the suspension working safely. Unfortunately, every single tool we had between 3 vehicles couldn't do the trick. A few minutes later, out of pretty much nowhere, a guy hiked up to us and asked us what was going on. Told him couldn't get the part tightened and was screwed without it, as it would be unsafe to drive. He went into his pack and pulled out the exact tool I needed and got it fixed. We did our thanks, etc., and we went our separate ways. Drove for a long distance and don't remember seeing any vehicle or evidence that person was dropped off. It still freaks me out to this day, probably 7 years later, as it makes zero sense for him to have that type of tool for a hike on his own, and would just be adding to the weight of his pack. How or why was he there at the exact time I needed him? Story 23. We were doing the usual daily drive to school. Noticed a car parked up at the local oval. It was early. It was out of the ordinary. We could see people in the front and back seats just sitting there. Both Mum and I commented on it. Came home from school that afternoon. It was still there. Mum was triggered, school teacher. Was about to make a call when the news came on. Man had parked at the oval in the early a.m., terminated his wife, 2 kids in the back seat, then himself. From timeline, they would have been deceased when we saw them in the morning. To her credit, my mom didn't make a big deal out of it, and looking back, I know it would have been to protect me. I was 12, 13, and a sensitive kid. I knew then because of the news, I just didn't get it. I know now, though, and understand. I know she would have had a what the fudge just happened moment there and then. For me, it came a little later. Story 24. Me, 20F, supervisor of a contracted security, rent-a-cop branch. Get called to a client meeting. They are pissed. They have never met me face-to-face, so don't think they realized I was 20. They wanted to show me a video of what an officer was doing, but just sent me home with a copy of it instead and said I could make my own judgment as to what to do. Video. One of my guards, while on duty, stripping down to his boxers and getting in a sleeping bag in the basement of the client site. Takes a nap. Wakes up and grabs the fry container. Think paper boat dishes he had eaten his lunch out of. Puts it on the floor, pulls down boxers, squats and takes a cow. Picks the container up and examines the contents. Sitting at my desk watching this and having to call my boss is a moment I will never forget. Story 25. I was involved in a car accident on April 5th of this year. I'm in an exit-only lane on the freeway. There's another lane that branches off, so you can continue straight or take the exit. I see a dude reversing on the freeway, headed for the exit. I've seen some dumb cow, but didn't really think anything of it. Then, all of a sudden, he drives through the shoulder, into the lane next to me, punches the gas, and proceeds to T-bone me in my driver's side door and wheel well. I barely had any time to react, but I braked, laid on the horn, and tried to pull off onto the shoulder to avoid getting hit. Dude didn't care. He stopped, I asked for his info. He went back to his car and took off. I stood there for a moment, absolutely furious. Try to chance him, but no luck. Call the cops. They ask if I need an ambulance. I tell them, no, I need to pick up my husband from work. Like I couldn't just not show up to get him in my mind. Vehicle was fine, just body damage, and it was a beater, so didn't really care. By the time I got to my husband's workplace, the adrenaline had worn off, so everything hurt. Dropped his co-worker off and drove myself to the hospital. Spent the night in the ER. They gave me basically injectable Advil for the pain first. And then when that wore off, they gave me ketamine. Didn't tell me, though, so one moment I'm fine and the next I'm tripping. So 2 WTF moments in the span of 12 hours. Thankfully doing much better now thanks to physio. Grade 2 whiplash is no joke. Also, fudge that dude for running away. Story 26. I was studying at my college student union when they announced over the PA that a bad storm was coming, and that they advised us to either leave now or shelter in place. I only lived like a 8 minutes walk away, so I quickly packed up and headed out. The union was on a hugely busy main street that I had to cross. About 200 feet out from the union, the storm hit. 95 miles per hour winds with gusts hitting 135 and no rain, yet. It was like struggling up a mountain, straining for each step, leaning forward at an angle like a cartoon character. The air was thick with dirt and debris, so I put my sunglasses on to help protect my eyes. For some stupid reason, I kept going forward. Then a piece of construction fence liner fabric tore off its fence and hit me full force in the chest and wrapped around my torso and head. It flung me peach over backwards, rolling into the middle of the street. I lay there stunned for a min, and then it hit me that I was going to be run over if I stayed there. I struggled out of the fabric and crawled desperately for the sidewalk, where I then laid down to catch my breath. The only reason I wasn't run over was because the car, an intersection away from me, stopped to let people run across the street. I got up and kept struggling forward. Halfway up my side street, it started raining, and I had to go around a downed tree covering the sidewalk. I was feeling pretty thankful I didn't get hit by the falling tree. Then I got to my apartment building. The 50-foot tree that had been standing in front of the building was now half its size. The missing half was easily located since it had crashed through the front porch entrance, completely destroying and covering it. If I hadn't been delayed by being thrown into the street, I might have been standing on that porch when the tree came down. Story 27. My uncle, cousin, and a friend of theirs showed up to mow my lawn. I went outside to greet them and exchange pleasantries, then back in to let them get to it. No less than 30 seconds later, I hear shouting and look out my window to see the lawn in flames. Turns out the friend had suggested it would be faster to burn the grass. The 4-foot-high grass. The property had been vacant for a long time before I moved in, on a windy day. And my uncle decided to show him what a stupid idea that was by way of asterisk whipping out a lighter and setting the grass ablaze asterisk. It quickly got out of control and burned the entire lawn to ash, and it was only by way of a garden hose, water buckets, and furious stomping that the house didn't catch. My uncle then proceeded to drive over the smoldering ash with the riding mower to try and make it look better. My mother had the gall to suggest it all turned out okay, say they should still get paid, and couldn't understand why I was angry. Story 28. While my ex-wife and I were engaged, I lost my job and she put deposits down on everything for the wedding. She implied the deposits were 30 to 100%, leaving me owing about 50%. She expected me to pay for the remainder after I found a job. After the wedding, I had a new job, and I was crippled financially for a few weeks and was stressed beyond belief. Her deposits were actually 10 to 20%. Unfortunately, she held me to my word while she lived it up pretty large without me. It was pretty clear she tricked me. We get divorced a few months later because I didn't like her boyfriend. My mother was mad and demanded my ex to give her the deposit money back. My mother paid the deposits. 2 of the wedding bills were fake companies, and her frides made a lot of money off me. Story 29. Myself and GF are sat out the front of our tent chilling out at a music festival. It's a summer evening and getting dark, and a guy walks past carrying his sleeping child, 4-yo maybe, back to their tent. He passed our tent and got a bit further down, then got a foot caught in a guy rope and tripped face first right onto his kid. There's an audible crack and the kid starts screaming and keening like a wounded animal. As the dad picks him up, the kid's lower arm is snapped clean in half and dangling, though no bones poking out. We get the on-site ambulance there ASAP and they're rushed to hospital. In the morning, their tent is gone. Story 30. Lunch with good friend, really nice person, would give you the shirt off their back, very kind and conservative. I notice she's not so subtly trying to pick something out of her back teeth. In fact, she's practically got half her arm in there. It's a bit hard to focus on the conversation, she says. Sorry, I've got something stuck in my teeth and I think no flipping cow. Then she says, oh, got it, there it is, and takes it out and holds it in front of me on the table. She tells me it's a piece of chicken as she lovingly cradles it like it's a baby bird or a precious jewel. We both stare at this chunk of food that has been in her mouth. I wanted to ask why the hell she'd think I wanted to see that. If I was married, it's not even something I'd show my husband. I mean, why? Why? Story 31. I was out back on my deck. It was like a gunslinger scene. A dumb fudge squirrel Abby at 25 far away locks eyes with me. It starts to race towards me. No fear. So I get ready, Balboa stance, ready to slap the cow out of this little asswipe. He jumps. I swear I can see his eyes fully. I swing. I miss the little. It slides into the brick by my front door, runs in my house. Dog loses his mind, barking. Bravery was his crack that day. He jumps in my counter and comes at me. I yell at him like a dumbass. Come get it, motherfucker. Swing to miss. Runs out, climbs the vines up the side of my home. A BOE top rope dive at me, kisses my arm as he falls on his melon, then takes off. I stand, fists up, surveying the back deck. A small bag is taken off. That's my WTF moment. I have to look both ways when I come outside now. Story 32. Was working F-15S for the USAF. We were flying out of a different base than usual because our runway was being resurfaced. We'd only had 2 major incidents that week, so it was going pretty well for this kind of thing. Then, as I'm sitting in the back of our bread van-style truck with the rest of my coworkers, we hear a asterisk bang. Whiz! Zip! Bzah! Bang! So the bang was weapons setting off a bomb launcher by accident, causing the metal shaft to fly out and hit the ground. The whiz was that metal shaft hitting the concrete, taking a chunk out, then bouncing up to hit the wing of the plane, before it zipped out down the taxiway, where it bzzz along the concrete until it bounced up again and banged right into the side of our truck right behind my flipping head. Another piece was found nearly a quarter mile down the taxiway. Story 33. Was smoking a joint with one of my co-workers who worked the overnight shift. During our union meeting, a little after midnight, a couple of dudes were walking by and having an animated conversation, nothing pointing that this would escalate. Me and my coworker are smoking our joint shooting the cow while the guys just keep walking. When they were about half a block away, their conversation turned heated, voices raised and some yelling. Dude 1 is walking back towards the path they just came from. Dude 2 is behind trying to talk to Dude 1. Dude 1 is like, no, back up, leave me alone. Meanwhile, Dude 2 is approaching him and trying to console him. Dude 2 kept approaching while Dude 1 was like, please back up, go away. This goes on for about a minute, then it turns into a really heated argument. Dude 1 out of nowhere pulls out an aluminum bat and hits Dude 2 in the leg. Hits him again while he's on the ground and yells, why didn't you listen? Why'd you make me do this? Then drags Dude 2 to the sidewalk and tries to nurse his, probably fractured leg. Turned to my coworker and was like, did you just see that? I finished the joint, walked back in while telling my coworker to break the tension. I'm gonna head back in case homie comes back and wants to play baseball with our legs. Rough part of town, so not too shocking. Story 34. When I was probably about 4 or 5, there was a random cat in my yard. I loved animals, so I very excitedly wanted to go pet it. I was slow and cautious because I know they can be skittish. This thing was anything, but it walked right up to me, chirping and tail held high. Right as I reached down to go pet it, it latched onto my face with its claws. Bad person tricked me. I had a gigantic bleeding scratch from my temple down to the bottom of my chin. I didn't even scream or anything because I was just so flipping confused. I remember stupidly thinking that it attacked me because in my other hand I was holding a very non-realistic dog plushie. I'm lucky I didn't get sick from that scratch because I definitely didn't disinfect it after. Story 35. Me and my mate are waiting for a taxi outside a venue in Huddersfield Town Center after a heavy night of getting on it raving. There's a few other heads outside the venue just hanging out, deciding whether to carry on or waiting for a taxi like us. It's probably between 3 and 5 in the morning. Off in the distance, we could hear a car being driven pretty hard, and in a minute or so, we see this car come flying round the corner. Proper nice Messport BMW. I think it came past once or twice on the main carriageway before it actually drove up the road and screeched to a halt in the middle of the road next to us lot. Windows wind down, and we're greeted by the strangest sight at that time in that car. 3 girls in the car, none of them looking old enough to either own that car or really have a license to drive it. They wanted some lads to get in and go with them, but none of us were having any of it. We said, "Whose car is it?" They said it was theirs. A few of us said it's stolen that, and they were laughing and saying no. They really wanted any of us to get in the car with them and go with them and have some fun, but thankfully we were all aware and clever enough not to listen to them. Eventually they got off, wheels spinning, calling us all boring as fudge. We all stood there in stunned silence for a second before going, "What the fudge was that?" Still to this day, I have no idea who they were, whose car it was, whether they were even old enough to drive, or what happened to him that night. The way they were going, I have a feeling they probably crashed it at one point. They were all over the place. Just one of the most surreal things that always comes to mind. Story 36. I live in Baltimore, which is honestly a daily exercise in what the fudge just happened moments. But to mine, specifically, I don't know if you've heard, but, the Key Bridge collapsed, a.k.a. the bridge I have to cross every single day for work. So suffice to say, my commute to and from work has become real interesting. So one day, it's rush hour, and I'm sitting in the parking lot that we like to call 895, bumper to bumper, slowly crawling my way through the hell that is the toll plaza to get into the tunnel. I'm glancing around the toll plaza, because what the fudge else am I going to do? And in the lane next to me, I see one of those construction vehicles that is essentially a beefy pickup truck, where the bed of the truck is basically a giant dumpster, the kind used to remove bulk waste from work sites and such. I'm looking at this truck, which is stuck in traffic like the rest of us, when suddenly the driver throws open his door, jumps out of the truck, and Asterisk throws himself in the dumpster Asterisk. He just scrambled up the side and flipping yeeted himself into the dumpster. I then watch as Asterisk, another Asterisk dude, scurries out of the back seat, hops into the driver's seat, closes the door, and resumes the slow crawl through the toll plaza as if nothing happened. Best part? The guy who threw himself into the dumpster never emerged. I was side by side with this truck the whole time and followed it the entire length of the tunnel and onto the open highway. Dude never came back out. Wherever you are, dumpster man, I hope it's better than where you went. Story 37. In university, my roommate and I lived in an apartment. We liked to go out on the balcony and watch thunderstorms. The last 3 or 4 so-called thunderstorms were pretty underwhelming. So we go out there because there is another one brewing and the sky kind of grumbles, and that is it. I yell at the sky, "You call that a thunderstorm?" And no kidding. 1 second later, the entire world goes white, and there is a sound. Sounds more like an explosion than thunder. My roommate and I are reeling. Suddenly, I see sparks cascading overhead. And it dawns on me. Holy nonsense, the building just got struck. We were only 2 floors from the top. We dive back into the apartment. Religiously, I am philosophically an agnostic, but practically an atheist. But that one event and the unlikely set of circumstances really makes me wonder. Story 38. In 7th grade, one of my friends had somehow annoyed a group of girls. They were crazy and chased us all around the school at an activity night. We ran for the boys' bathroom, but one of the girls dove at his legs and tripped him. We then engaged in tug-of-war, us versus the girls, the rope being my friend. Eventually, the girls dragged him away because there was none of them and 4 of us. Once they had him, they tried to pull down his pants so they could punch him square in the junk. What none of us expected was for said friend to pull a full-on WWE poison mist maneuver with his Capri Sun. He blinded one of the girls momentarily and then ran off, leaving me, my other friend, and this kid's brother standing there on end shock at the bathroom door. Story 39. Went on FMLA, short-term disability leave, for a month due to my mental health declining to a severe point. I have diagnosed borderline personality disorder, so taking the time was crucial. Came back to work feeling much better and ready to support my sales team properly again. Got written up 3 times in my first 4 days back to work for things that have never been addressed prior to taking my leave. Then my boyfriend got fired from his job without cause that same week. Then my company announced that they have come to an agreement to sell a portion of the business to another competitor with an anticipated closing date of mid-year 2025. What the fudge just happened is exactly what ran through my mind. Story 40. Is high school homeroom class. I trained in mixed martial arts for a couple years at that time. My family was a big combat sport family, and my friend wanted me to teach him a chokehold. I decided to teach him the rear choke since it was the easiest. Probably not the best choice, ATM LOL. So I show him the lock position and proceed to have him just hold it on me so he can know how it feels like. Then I told him to slowly squeeze so that he continues to know what it feels like. I tap to let him know to release me. I keep tapping and keep tapping. Then wake up on the floor thinking, what the fudge just happened? Bro did not know what a tap meant. Like he watched MMA and saw fights of people tapping, so I assumed he knew what that meant. And dude just did not release me, LOL. Mind you, my homeroom teacher was right in front of us and did not see any of this. I legit said, did you just see me pass out? Her response? Oh no, don't do it again. 10/10 wouldn't do again. Story 41. Was having a friendly conversation with a girl at a house party once when I was in HS or college. I don't remember. No flirting or anything, just talking while standing in the kitchen. All of a sudden, she got a kitchen knife and started waving it around and saying, "Yes, massa." She was black. She kept walking toward me, but I used the kitchen island as a buffer. Eventually, she stopped and I stayed away from her. I'm now 40 years old, and it still confuses me. I have no clue how it could have escalated like that. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I 100% know it had nothing to do with race or any other heavy topic. Still blows my mind.